recording and transcript will be published afterwards on the State Assembly website. All electronic devices, including mobile phones, should be switched to silent. I would like to ask members of the public who have joined us, welcome. Please do not interfere with proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please do leave as quickly as you can. And for purpose of the recording and transcript, I would like to be grateful if everyone could speak, who speaks, to ensure that they stated their name and role if they haven't done so already. So I first would like to do a round of introductions. So my name is Deputy Hilary Jearn, and I'm the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Tom Coles, Vice Chair.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
David Johnson, Constable Area Member.
And David Wall, Deputy David Wall, even St Helier South.
Thank you. And we have Minister, before you go online, we have our external advisor. So I'd just like to invite her to also to introduce herself.
Yeah, hello. My name is Ness Smith. I'm a consultant at Howell Marine Consulting. I'm a specialist in marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, and integrated marine management. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Deputy Steve Luce. I'm Minister for the Environment.
Francis Binney, Head of Marine Resources.
Samantha Blompier, Data Officer for Marine Resources.
Thank you very much, and we have a lot of questions to get through. But first of all, I wanted to start today, Minister, because the panel would like to acknowledge the huge amount of work that the officers especially have gone through in making this marine spatial plan, as we've been handed this massive document, but also acknowledging that this is only some of it, and as you had said, that also the consultation as well is equally as chunky. And so we will try to focus on as much as we can in the hearing today, but we are aware that there are much more details in the plan than what we are able to in the 2 hours. So we are focusing, but we do really acknowledge the work that has been done. So first of all, Minister, I'd like to first start off with, can you explain to the panel what's the main driver for creating the Marine Spatial Plan for Jersey, and when was this process begun?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your kind words to the officers. As we all know, this is a Marine Spatial Plan draft which I inherited when I became Minister 6 months ago. And Chair, you'll only be too aware of the start of this work, and it's the officers next to me and other officers in the department that have put this together. Just to recap very, very briefly, I came into office when this plan, the draft plan, was out to consultation. You've seen the responses, as I did. I've made some changes, mainly because of those responses, and that is the result that we have in front of us today. It's important to use the word draft, and it appears on the front cover, final draft. As we all know, this is going to the Assembly later this year, where there may be subject to further amendments, which we will debate before we get to the final document. But I think, getting back to your question, marine spatial plans are a relatively new concept, but they are something that's been put in place around the globe and worldwide acknowledged as a best way forward for marine areas generally. And certainly hats off to the department for taking this on board and moving forward. We're the first place in the Channel Islands to have done this work, but we have consulted widely with others who have already marine spatial plans in place. But this is almost sort of an island plan for the sea, an island plan for the marine areas, if you like. And many of the sections in here are without legislation, without rules and regulations. But it's important that we talk about all the various marks, the shipwrecks, the environment, the type of species that we have under the water, at the same time as we talk about all the economic impact that the marine areas can have for the island. And that's not just fishing, that's recreational fishing, it's tourism, and of course there's all sorts of other environmental benefits to much of the work that we want to do. So the idea of a marine spatial plan is not new, but certainly new to the Channel Islands, and the department quite rightly felt it was a really important document, and a lot of people, a lot of very experienced and well thought of people have been amazed how quickly we've managed to do this, and how well researched and what a good document it is in draft form. So it won't, if I might allow officers on both sides of me to say a bit more to add to what I've got to say, because as I said, this is a new plan to me, but this is very much their work, and they will be far more knowledgeable about everything in here. So maybe I could ask Francis just to, is there anything you want to expand on the need for marine spatial plans?
I think in terms, thank you, Minister, in terms of the drivers for it, there are many elements where we were coming to a crunch point where competing interests in the sea were getting stronger and stronger, and there was a need to have a structure so that people could understand what the future would look like in Jersey's territorial waters and have security to invest in their businesses or invest in their environment, understanding what was going to happen around it in a more clear and long-term way. In terms of a real driver for our timeline, the Bridging Island Plan set this as a specific objective when it was debated. One of the proposals that was added to the Bridging Island Plan was for a large marine park, often called the Emerald J, that wasn't taken on board at that time, but instead of that, a plan to build an MSP that would include a network of marine protected areas was a requirement of the Bridging Island Plan. And this document is, as you say, Minister, an island plan for the sea, but also a feeder for the next island plan. And hopefully that's where we'll see a long lifetime of this document build and grow.
Yeah, and I think it's important to state that this is a live document that will continue to evolve. As I said, there's lots of sections in here that have no legislation or legal rights involved with them, but it would be our intention as this document moves forward and evolves that legislation may fall into place around, for example, the protection of the offshore reefs from mass tourism. There may be other things other than fishing that we want to protect, and this document will set out, there's a long list you will have seen of things that we could do. Some are resourced, some have the hope of resourcing in the near future, and some are going to be quite long term. So this is, I don't want to describe it as an aspirational document because what is there is documented in here, but there's a lot of work to continue to bring this properly to fruition in the next decades. But it will continue to evolve as data increases and we have time and resource money to do the work.
Thank you. You've talked a bit about the need to do this because of the marine space being more crowded, but what were the specific objectives that were identified at the beginning of the process? And were there clear priorities for the use of Jersey's marine space and natural capital that were set out by for officers responsible for the delivering the MSP at the beginning? And were they made publicly available at the beginning as well?
I'm going to hand that one over the start of the project.
So there was strategic priority 3 in the Bridging Island Plan was very simply the brief we were given, which was to develop and deliver a marine spatial plan that would include a network of marine protected areas. From there, rather than work internally to decide where the ministerial or officer priorities might be, we started by going out to consultation to scope the marine spatial plan from the public. And those were the series of workshops we ran in February and March 23. Gosh, that feels like a long time ago now. We divided them up into different subject areas: cultural heritage, commercial fishing, energy and infrastructure, and environment and biodiversity. Have I got those right, Sam?
It's also tourism and recreation.
Tourism and recreation as well, and then also a youth parliament session as well, and gave people large A1 charts of Jersey's territorial areas, a bit of a brief, and then got people to just give us their ideas. And that was really a ground-up way of building what the island wanted from an MSP. And we asked people, what do you like about how the sea works? Not how it works, but how the sea is used around Jersey now. What don't you like? What would you like to see in the future, and what don't you want to see in the future? And it was a really interesting process because you had commercial fishermen sitting at tables with rib charter operators and with wildlife photographers and all sorts of other people. You had people responsible for our electricity cables sitting down at tables with people who want to extract various elements from the seabed or use it for different purposes. and you've got that dynamic of conversation and different people inputting different things. So it was a slightly sidetracked way of saying, no, there wasn't a specific agenda beyond try and build it with as much public interest as possible.
Right, so understanding is that, yeah, you didn't start with objectives beyond the Bridging Eye Plan, but you scoped it from there. Did you feel that, in your view, Minister Officers, what was the level of urgency for the Jersey to have a marine spatial plan? Was, you know, what was that level of urgency, or did it just become because of the Bridging Island Plan discussion?
Well, certainly the Bridging Island Plan was the reason it had to be done. But I think there is a level of urgency around certain areas. I've mentioned one, which is potential pressures of tourism on the offshore reefs and the habitat, the environment there. Certainly, the most contentious part of this draft is the fishing area, the commercial fishing area, and there are, we can look back quite recently certainly in the last decade, to a time 5 or 6 years ago where there were a lot of lobster in the sea, and the fishing fleet took what they could, and the population of lobsters fell away quite quickly, and we're now in the process of trying to rebuild that. I think I'm correct in saying that. My fear is that sort of thing happens again, and I'm very keen to make sure that where we have a stock of a particular species, we don't overfish it. So that is certainly coming out as part of this. And of course, there's environmental benefits as well, because we know that certain types of fishing métiers are more damaging to the seabed than others. We want to take that into account. I'm trying to think of other really important reasons, but certainly the documentation of things like archaeology, of the marks, important landmarks or sea marks, if you like, and the documentation of the various habitats, what's there, which seaweeds, what type of rock, all these things were an important part of it. But for me, making sure that we protect our sea moving forward was really important. And I hope that this document will start us down this process of making sure we know where the really special areas are and that we're taking proper measures to protect them and do what we can to look after it for the future.
And Minister, do you believe then that that's what what you've just described is the objective, is the objective of the Marine Spatial Plan, is that's now drafted as is? Because of course we've heard about the scoping to get to that point of starting to develop the Marine Spatial Plan, but the actual objectives of the Marine Spatial Plan as it is, would you say that was to protect the?
Well, yes, that would be one very important part of it. But I think, there is a saying that I use very occasionally: is if you don't have a plan, you can't change it. I thought it was really important that we get everything down into a document. If somebody comes forward with an idea about harvesting seaweed into the future with commercial benefits and whatever, we need somewhere to go. We need a document to refer to that says, right, here's the rough guidance, here's this is the type of thing we want to do in the future. Does it fit into the spatial plan? What other factors might there be that will affect that? Was it commercial? Is it environmental? Is it social, for that matter, depending what it is? So I think it's such an important document, because it's day one, if you like. Once we get this through, we then start with this and we can build on it. And I think one of the most important things was to have it in the first place, because these plans, as I say, they're not absolutely new. There's a lot of places around the world that have adopted them now, but I think it's right to say that anybody with a proper eye on the environment and their marine resources wants to have one of these plans in place for their jurisdiction.
Yeah, certainly, Minister. And if I may add, for future objectives that Jersey has, such as the wind farm, developers will look to see things like a marine spatial plan in place to understand that the government of an area where there may be potential to develop things like this have taken a measured approach that has had public scrutiny on it before looking to invest money in delivering those things. So it is an enabler of the future use of our marine resource. The Minister also mentioned seaweed harvesting, and from an officer's perspective, a really important reason for having the plan is questions like seaweed harvesting and offshore aquaculture and other uses of the sea have been coming more and more frequently to us as a department, and without a guiding policy on where and when and how these should be allowed to develop and where they should be spatially prioritised, it's very difficult for people to understand what is and isn't possible. So with this and what we'll hopefully develop from it, following the state's debate, we'll have a structure that will allow people to really get a grip on what is viable within Jersey's waters and where within those waters different activities can and can't, or should and shouldn't take place. So they don't invest money poorly in doing an environmental impact area for a seaweed farm and then realise it's quite an important fishing area or shipping area or bird resting area.
Or that it's got archaeology, or it's
Yeah.
a local interest because it's a low water fishing or traditional recreation, and many factors.
But as you've already mentioned, Minister, that this plan is not a statutory or policy document in its own right. And so could you explain kind of the rationale behind that, especially how do you envisage that the actions will be able to be prioritised in future governments with it being a plan but not having that basis of a statutory document or policy
like
document?
everything, as we know, there's economic pressures to deliver all the various ideas and policies that we as politicians might wish to do. And I think it's clear that the priority in here already has some legislation behind it, which is fishing, and the work that we'll do on marine protected areas and other associated areas already has some legislation in place for us to go to. There will be some new work that will need to be done, but at least we have the basis of it. But I think into the future, as we identify greater pressures on any particular part of this plan, prioritisation from politicians will come to the fore, and they'll say, right, it's important to do this work, I need to prioritise some money next year or some law officer time or what have you, so that we pick and choose. And it may be where we see threats to a particular part of this plan coming down the line that we choose to put those priorities in place. And I think that's the only way we can do it. It would be lovely to have the resource to go away and put the legislation in place for the whole of the plan, but we have to be realistic in that that's not going to happen. As I said, the section, is it in the draft document, or is it one of the supplementary documents where we identify all the issues, and there's some resource applied and there's resource available, but the amount of headings with resource available is quite few and far between, unfortunately.
Sam can speak to the part
it's at the end of the document, and it highlights what the lead organisation or department should be, and if those resources are already there, or to say not there. And it's just to inform ministers in future work streams whether you're first going to have to secure some either manpower or funding to do that work.
And we touch on this later, so we'll come back to this point. But I just wanted to bring in, again, we bring marine protected areas, again, we're going to follow on that very specifically later. But, as you've just mentioned, this is it's got a document, a plan of, what we really would like in the future, but it's not necessarily resourced yet. What was the consideration? And I understand that what you were saying is the Bridging Island plan, and then put in that within this marine spatial plan, you should have the marine protected areas within. But do you think that there has been an advantage or a disadvantage by putting in the marine protected areas within the marine spatial plan, which is much bigger? And would you see that actually there could have been a different process where one could have gone and then the other, so to be able to kind of focus resources and get that sorted?
I think the point that Francis made just now about making sure that when you consider one part in isolation, that you realise there's other considerations that factor into the same thing is important. And the marine protected areas are a classic example of that. I think it's all very well to say, right, we'd like to protect this area here, but it's really important that one understands all the other pressures on that, whichever particular area it might be. And it might be recreational fishing, it might be, in the case of mobile gear, scallop dredging, it might be scallop diving, it might be Ramsar, it might be a whole raft of things, and it's important that a document like this summarises all those issues in one place, so that if we are going to protect a particular area, we understand and we have there in the document a list of other pressures that we need to consider.
Yeah, understood.
We talk about marine protected areas, and yes, there was a large discussion that happened prior to the last island plan debate. Certainly certain ministers had aspirations of much larger areas being protected. I'm sure you'll have just spoken about 30 by 30 and the 30% of our area, if you like, being protected by 2030. We're very fortunate in Jersey, one of the few places, certainly in the last decade or so, we've had proper legislation, proper protection for our marine protected areas, and until quite recently, other jurisdictions may have designated areas for protection, but there was no legislation behind it to back that up. So we're fortunate that our protected areas were properly and are properly protected by legislation. That in itself will allow us to move more quickly into the future to change, to add further areas, because the law is there in place, as with no-take zones. We've gone over that initial hurdle, if you like, of designating a no-take zone. So we have the law in place. We're going to add to it with one very small area down on the Sauvage Reef, southeast of the Minkies. So we do have some really good grounding in place from a legislative perspective, which is really important as we evolve these marine protected areas moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we'll be touching on some of these later in the questions, and you've already helped to give some context in some of these for answers later. But we've received a number of submissions that touch on fisheries management. And can you be clear, and you've talked a little bit about fisheries management already in some of your answers, but can you be clear whether it's ever been the intention to include fisheries management at any level within this plan?
Certainly, I am aware that fisheries management into the future from this point on, well, we have some in place already, but it's increasingly important that we maintain and further develop management as we move forward, because that's the only way that we can be really sure to safeguard some of these species. The main thing is to get the protections in place, and we've done it fairly recently with a decision to issue permits to mobile to dredgers. Now we have the permits in place, now we have protected areas in place, which we will further add to. After that, very, very quickly must come management measures, which uses the data which the team acquire through all sorts of different ways of testing and harvesting and doing trial work. The data comes out, you see the trends, and you need to act really quite quickly, because overfishing in certain species can mean them disappearing altogether. I mean, whelks, for example, is reasonably well, and if you overfish a whelk stock, it disappears. Other species may invade and make it very, very difficult to build that stock up again. So management is vital.
Thank you, and we will touch on some of that later.
Protection first, then management very quickly afterwards.
Thank you. I think we'll pass on now. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to, at each end of these sections, just to go to our external advisor and see if the external advisor has any questions at this point on the particular areas. So it's just to pass over to Ness to see if there was any in this particular area that you have heard you would like to ask more questions on.
Yeah, just it's really interesting, thank you. Just a clarification on the stakeholder consultation, which hopefully will come later. But so the workshops were themed by area, but the participants were mixed. Is that correct?
So we used our reasonably extensive contact list as well as public advertisement to offer access to those workshops to anyone. Anyone could attend any workshop, but the message we put out was you will probably gain most from attending the workshop focused around your subject area, because you'll be speaking to people not with the same interest necessarily, but who cut across the same issues. That said, we did have certain organisations who made sure they were represented at every single one of the sessions. So Ports of Jersey were present at all sessions. The fishing community had representatives at all sessions, and other NGOs were present multiple times, and other organisations. So they weren't exclusive, and no one was turned away, except for Youth Parliament, because that had to be Youth Parliament, and there was pizza, so you couldn't have everyone. But other than that, it was open, but focused, if not tailored.
And also there were drop-in sessions as well as the organised ones with invitees. There was also invitation to say officers will be here between these times come and talk to us.
Great.
Yeah, excuse me, we'll get that in a lot more detail later, so that's useful for now, thank you.
Thank you very much. And so now I'd like to pass over to Deputy Coles to talk more about the process and structure of the MSP.
Thank you, Minister. You have mentioned obviously that the MSP is going to be sort of like the starting frame for future plans and everything. So I just wanted to sort of know what analysis has been done about the potential future uses of Jersey's marine space and the natural capital and the plan and its uses.
Do you want to kick off? Or Sam, I was going to say maybe.
Well, so the analyses that have been done so far are based on what we currently have. So it's not so much looking at what would happen once the plan goes in, other than the business impact assessment to show what potential losses there would be to the fishing fleet in the immediate term. But the evidence-based documents that inform the plan and come alongside the plan have an ecosystem services assessment. There's a sensitive species assessment in there as well. And it also has the information report regarding the information for the MPA designation, MPA proposals.
And there's a commitment to go back and revisit that work once this plan has been in place for a reasonable period of time, because we realise, you know, we've done some economic analysis on what might happen. We can't be really sure, so it's great. It would be good to revisit at regular intervals to make sure what we expected to happen actually has gone out.
So in this sort of context, what is a reasonable time frame? What does that kind of look like?
Well, certainly you'd need the bare minimum 12 months, but I would have thought the department would monitor it, but one would revisit it after 2 or 3 years maybe.
Yeah.
Officially, you know, properly.
It'll be active work once the plan has been through the states. The aim will be to work with other departments and establish that everyone understands where their areas of it are, and then to monitor progress of that and report back to the Minister, certainly after 12 months and then perhaps 3 and 5 years.
The point to stress, though, of course, this is a draft plan, as we know, is going to the Assembly. Once we know what comes out the other side of the Assembly, that's fine, but that doesn't mean to say 3 weeks later these are all going to be, all the recommendations will be in place. There's going to be quite a lot of work to then go ahead into designating the areas properly and the other pieces of legislation.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the data sets that you're using. Are you satisfied that it's all, you know, peer reviewed and up to the good level of standard that it would need to be?
Yeah, so in particular, the habitat map model that's the basis of a lot of those assessments was peer reviewed. The way that model was made and some of the work that's come out of that, especially the blue carbon assessment, that's all been peer reviewed by a professor in the University of St Andrews. And some of the others draw on work from peer reviewed work, but the reports themselves have been, they've been through multiple offices in the department, but the reports themselves, such as the ecosystem services assessment, that hasn't had further peer review from sort of like a university.
That's fine, thank you. Could you outline the sources and funding to develop the environmental data which has informed the plan?
Francis.
So I joined the department in 2016, and Marine Spatial Plan was written on a whiteboard in there of aspirational targets, and we were gathering the data from way back then and before. Our former director, Greg Morrell, had it on the list for a long time when he was in post, and we have built the data sets that would inform management, whether through the formal structure of an MSP or through just the day-to-day work of what we do in individual area plans, such as the agriculture strategy or the coastal zone management plan, over a long period of time. Those documents themselves have also fed in, but the data collection hasn't been a specifically budgeted, defined item. There have been areas where we've identified a need for further information, have gone out and gathered that data in particular, but generally it's long-term, well-established data sets. Often data sets generated through industry, such as all the fishing information, the catch information, and everything else that's fed into it. Spatial data is all off publicly available, spatial boat data is all of publicly available tracking systems, AIS, VMS, so that we can tap into. So it's been a huge farming process to gather in all the data. And there are areas such as, and I think we'll touch on it later, when you look at the proposed MPA network, the further research zones do require further work. So rather than having further work going beforehand and specifically targeted, it's generated the need for it going forward.
But some of our data sets are very long established. I mean, I think our whelk trials, for example, go back decades.
96?
Yeah, a long time. We've got some really good data sets on species.
Can you explain the rationale for focusing on spatial analysis of MPA designation of fisheries while excluding sectors such as offshore renewables?
Sorry, could you just run that question through
Sorry,
again?
yeah, could you explain the rationale for focusing on spatial analysis on MPA designation and fisheries while excluding other sectors such as offshore renewables?
Well, I wouldn't say we've excluded offshore renewables specifically, but we certainly haven't spent as much time talking about that, in as much as I think we realise when it comes to offshore renewables, there's going to be limited areas that we could do that work, and I think it's always been identified that this area to the southwest of our territorial waters will be the area that a wind farm, marine wind farm would go. I think on the basis that that was always a prerequisite, we probably decided to concentrate on the fishing in the marine protected areas. But I wouldn't say it's been done exclusively, but there's going to be a huge amount of work that if the area has been designated initially, as we know through the State Assembly, there will be a massive amount of work that will come through that wind farm process, which will inform this as well, because there's a lot of habitat and species work that will be required, environmental, impact assessments and marine impact assessments. There's a huge amount of work that will be needed to inform any application for a wind farm.
So maintaining the sort of linking your data sets, collections back into making the next evolution of your document.
Absolutely. If I might add, Minister, the timeline of the MSP drafting and development was the same as the timeline for the initial consultation on Jersey's appetite for wind. So we recognised at the point of working on this that the public opinion on a wind farm was being sought at the same time, and the plan couldn't include something that wasn't finished that was being run at the same time, but also couldn't presuppose the answers of that. So we recognised in the plan that the appetite for wind has been decided. Now in the later drafts, we've identified the areas that were decided in it, but there was a full piece of work as large as the Marine Spatial Plan going on in parallel. So the decision was to dovetail them in together in due course. And
there were in certain areas there was a little bit of confusion. I think we had a response which really should have gone to the wind farm, which came into the Marine Spatial Plan, and we had to make sure that we had our bit but passed it on, and not really ideal to have both those pieces of work going on at the same time, but we managed to get through it.
So on to a bit around the trade-offs between the different sectors and then cumulative effect of human activities now and in the future. Addressing developing the Marine Spatial Plan and associated policies and actions. What can you tell us?
Well, I think there's always going to be trade-offs, but various policies and actions, I just refer back to the fact that I think it's important when you consider any particular issue when it comes to our territorial waters to understand there's always going to be a number of different factors being affected. It could be, commercial shipping, it could be the environment, it could be the impact on bird life, it could be a whole range of things. So trade-offs, I don't know, but I think if we receive an application in any particular direction, it's always important to realise there's many different facets. It's not just, we've talked about seaweed harvesting, it's not just that, there's a whole load of other stuff going on, which is what this plan is there to highlight.
Was there or was any consideration given to conducting a sustainability appraisal or similar process for the Marine Spatial Plan?
So part of there were all the baseline background documents that we set up that did an element of that. In terms of sustainability, I mean, you've got the 4 pillars of the Marine Spatial Plan, which are environmental, economic, cultural and social, which all need to be in balance and considered sustainable for the plan to be a success. One of the objectives after the plan has been through the state's debate is to commission an economic impact assessment, or really a sustainability impact assessment of the plan that looks at its final version and decides, looks at the various values. And there are two reasons for doing it after it goes through debate. One is that there may be changes to it in this next couple of months. And the other is that some of the work that would be quite important and useful for that is subject to ongoing research, which has been done over this summer. So we've taken 90-odd cores from around Jersey seabed through a PhD process with Exeter this summer, that in terms of looking at some of the carbon work and some of the habitat work on the seabed is going to be really useful feed-in data for that. It hasn't happened yet, but it is part of the next stage of the plan.
Can I just add on that? We're talking about the trade-offs and the fact that you'll be doing a sustainable impact assessment after developing the plan. But on one hand, I'm hearing that the plan kind of should be encompassing everything, and then from there we work out kind of how to which priorities are first and how to resource that. And actually there's a lot more detail that needs to be developed on different areas that have been identified within the plan. And then on the other hand, that we're hearing, and it's from submissions as well, that there already has been trade-offs to develop the plan in the first place. And I was wondering how, with that question that Deputy Coles asked about the trade-offs that have been done before getting into the plan, what was done, how did you assess that?
Can you be a bit more specific about the trade-offs?
Well, for example, we'll talk about the marine protected areas before, but ultimately, if the objective was to reach 30 by 30, for example, shouldn't that be the objective, identifying 30 by 30, identifying where you could possibly put 30% of marine protected areas, and then from there see how you plan it up to that point, rather than saying at the moment that you've only got some.
Politics is all about the art of a compromise, and certainly I inherited a plan which was out of consultation at the time, and I listened to everything that people were telling me, and I felt there was some compromise that was required. So what I did was, it wasn't a trade-off particularly. I said, okay, we know 2030 is an important year for all sorts of various reasons. And I decided that I wanted to make more concessions to the mobile gear. I wanted to make more concessions to commercial fishermen, to make their lives, their livelihoods, if you like, less impacted on day one. So what we've done here is we've indicated that rather than go from the 0 to here in one hit, there are some areas that I said we want more research done. So we need to be really sure that if we're designating a particular area as a marine protected area, there's something to protect. There are some areas, to the department's admission, they could do some more research on. So we've changed things there. We've recognised through the submissions, through economic data, that some small areas will have a major impact on the economic viability of some fishing boats. So we've recognised that, and we've said, okay, we're prepared to grant in these small areas grandfathering rights, where you will be allowed to continue as you have done for 5 years. Well, again, it's draft to be decided, but please be aware at the end of that period, you will no longer be able. So rather than doing everything or everything in one hit immediately, we've tried to mix and match a bit to help everybody, if you like. Now, I realise in doing what we've done, and it happened to me only this week, I've had a number of emails about mobile gear and how I'm putting them out of business by increasing protection areas. I've similarly had a scallop diver come to me in the last 48 hours with a very serious moan about how he feels that we haven't protected enough. And it's just like planning on whatever you do, somebody's going to be unhappy. And I appreciate that whatever we do here, somebody's going to be unhappy. For me, 30 by 30 was not a prerequisite. What I want to do is to get the fishing fleet to a point where we've got lots of protected areas, but there's still plenty of product in the sea for them to make a living. It's getting to that point is the tricky bit. We need to do it gradually. We need to do it by small steps, if you like, in conjunction with financial assistance for the industry. So when we get to a point where we've got a lot of the areas in our territorial waters closed off, the adjacent areas are full of fish, full of lobster, full of scallop, enough that the commercial fleet can continue to make a living. Because my worry is that we lose them before we get to that point, and there's no point in having lots of stuff to catch if there's nobody there to catch it.
Yeah.
Of course, and I think just that then with that question, it's really understanding what criteria and kind of get back to Deputy Cole's question about that sustainability appraisal or your sustainable impact assessment. Do you use that to be able to do the balance or not? Whether it's, how do you, it's a compromise, but is there evidence behind that? Is there an assessment framework behind that? So
well, certainly we've done the economic assessment. We know that at the moment the scallop stock, for example, is in a very good place. But we're also conscious that the amount of scallops, like the tonnage of scallops that we've exported this particular year, has been really, really strong. It's been a big number, a number to the point where actually I'm a bit concerned that we're not already overfishing, which is why I talk about management coming in immediately after the sort of designations. So it's balancing everything. I mean, I have been away with the CPA and spoken to people from, say, I think it was St Helena, where they have a fishing fleet which only fishes a small number of hours a day with a small number of pots and some really strong regulation. But they make a really good living because there's so much product in the sea, they can be very selective about what they take, about the quality that they take. And because there's a lot of product there, it reproduces very easily. And environmentally and commercially are working hand in hand and everybody's happy. That's my goal. Getting there is challenging.
Yeah, sure. Minister, just to carry on that, and this is about communication, obviously, and from some of the submissions we've had, it strikes me that the level of communication, the way in which it's being communicated to the industry, and the problem I also identify is the industry isn't just one group of people. It's not mobile. It's people with it's all sorts of different who have different emphasis. The feeling I've got is that there's been a lack of communication, and because it's just interesting. Earlier, you talked about the economic impact and how it's going to take you 12 months. You're probably going to review this in 12 months to see what the impact of the spatial changes are. Do you feel like you've communicated well enough with the industry? Because obviously you're getting emails now from dredgers who are saying you're putting me out of business and all the rest of it. Surely if you were communicating properly with the industry, you wouldn't be getting such emails. What would you say in response to that?
I have to say I've been a little bit disappointed with the communication I've had recently, because the information and the knowledge that I had was that there had been a lot of consultation. Certainly in my few months in office, I've seen a lot of consultation. In the last couple of weeks, I have to say some of the correspondence I've had would indicate that maybe some of the meetings the fishermen held, they may not have been represented in the way they thought. But depending who you speak to, you get a very different story. But I mean, Francis will tell you, and Sam will tell you, I mean, about the level of consultation. It's really important to me to talk to people about it. But I think we need to be under no illusions. The marine protected areas that we're talking about here hit one particular part of our commercial fleet much harder than others, and that's those that dredge. Mm-hmm. It's not scallop fishermen across the board, because we have got quite a thriving and expanding scallop diving industry in Jersey. But those that dredge for scallops are affected by this because certain areas are being closed that they have been used to dredging historically. But for many and varied reasons, the pressure's coming on those areas from others, whether it's potting, whether it's recreational, a whole range of things, or just the fact that there's a perception that there's damage. We can't deny that dredging is not great for the seabed. Now, the scallop dredgers will tell you, there's different types of dredging which is worse, and I agree. You know, prayer dredging dredges this deep. Is that right?
About 30 centimetres.
Yeah. So certain dredging operations are far more damaging than others, but dredging per se is not great for the seabed. We're sending a message. We're not putting you out of business. We're going to help you to carry on. But you know, I would hope that dredging, people who dredge realise that their particular way of doing this job is challenging. There's new technology being developed that would do the same job in a different way, would be much more environmentally friendly. And I don't know if you need to add anything? But talk about the meetings with fishermen, because they have been
I think,
extensive.
Yeah.
yeah, we're heading on to some questions about the consultation and engagement now with Deputy War, so we probably you could bring in those questions, because I just want to close off this process and structure part of the question. And I appreciate we went into this, but because I just wanted to bring in our external advisor just to see if there's any specific questions on what she's heard from around the process and structure, and then we can get into about the consultation and engagement. Ness.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating. So I guess the first question is going back to that futures analysis. Marine spatial planning is by definition future forward-looking, and part of that I would consider would be looking across all sectors and what development might happen in a set time. Maybe that's 20 years, 30 years into the future. But it then enables you to look at all of those potential developments, where they may be best located, and the sorts of trade-offs and cumulative effects that might result from that future. So that's trying to understand why there was a rationale that there was no agreement yet on offshore wind and whether it would be acceptable, but why it still wasn't included to sort of consider, is an offshore wind area going to potentially be a de facto MPA because you can't fish in there, and there's not going to be much activity. It's sort of looking about all those other sectors in the round and how that might look in the future. I'm just trying to understand the rationale for why those weren't integrated and considered.
Well, before I go to Francis, I would like to say it would be my belief that they were considered. Certainly we have some data on commercial sea routes. We have data on fishing areas. We know through the department the areas of our territorial waters which are less fished. And we know through just working with the French on their Saint-Brieuc wind farm, what parts of our territorial waters will be most suited to a wind farm. And by coincidence or whatever, however you care to look at it, I think the area to the southwest of the island, which has been identified in the wind farm consultation, sort of ticks all those boxes. It's not an area where our fishermen spend a lot of time, although some would say they do, but we don't feel they do. It's just about shallow enough to put wind turbines on the seabed. It's right on the limit, but it's shallow enough. And it could well be accessible enough to the French coast if we decide that that's where the power goes. But that's an incidental, if you like. But I think the area that's been identified for a wind farm ticks quite a few boxes that it would need to tick as the best area for various reasons. Francis?
Certainly. I'd also point out that a wind farm does not necessarily make a de facto MPA. Partly it's worth restating what the Minister said and saying that there's very little evidence of a lot of mobile gear fishing in that area. It's a very large static netting area. It's used for a lot of spider netting, some trawling, a little dredging as well. But if you look at the Saint-Brieuc wind farm, the objective there, and it has always been, to build the wind turbine system and have corridors that will be MPA because there are electricity cables running down them, but also then to have areas that are as accessible as possible to fishing. And we're looking, as I understand it, as much larger turbines with much larger spacing. So it's unlikely that you'll have the same as you see in some of the older North Sea and Irish Sea wind farms where there are full closures. You'll have integrated, multi-use, hopefully well-planned marine spaces.
And the other thing to add is I think that wind farms at sea now have been around long enough to see that there's quite a bit of habitat being provided to sea life in the basis of these structures and the rocks and stuff that are created around them. So I know it would be a period of time where there will be interference with the seabed and effects on the environment, but the hope would be coming out the other side that there would be some positives as well as some negatives.
Okay,
Notwithstanding the fact, of course, that we actually haven't made the final decision on our wind farm yet. the States Assembly have agreed to move to the next stage of creating the detail that they will need to make the final decision, but that final decision is certainly not yet decided.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ness. Thank you, Minister. So we will now pass over to Deputy Ward to talk about consultation and engagement, and you can pick up the question.
I was going to say, so this is probably going to pick up from where we got. So please can you describe the steps taken to integrate stakeholder participation into the development of the Marine Spatial Plan as a whole, and how this was managed and over what time period?
So I've already described the initial scoping workshops that took place that really set the scene for the Marine Spatial Plan. Just to give that some more context in case it's helpful, we engaged Fiona Fife consultants who are on the government's pre-approved list of consultants for this type of work. They did the landscape and seascape character assessment for Jersey, and they've worked here, so they know the area well. We worked with them to build an introductory session, to build an explanation, to engage people either in private, individual, one-to-one meeting sessions with particular industries, with particular areas, and then to build those broader stakeholder workshops where we started to get the feeling for what Jersey wanted out of its Marine Spatial Plan and what people wanted out of their sea, more to the point, because the plan is the document, but the sea is the thing that matters to people. We built that consultation process through. That really gave us our grounding and our foundation. We also used the Marine Resources Panel, which is a long-established stakeholder group that we have in Jersey, and we meet quarterly with the panel, who are one of the minister's main advisory body on marine issues, and updated them, listened to information from them, and looked for opportunities to discuss each phase of the development of plan with that main group that involves commercial and recreational fishing, marine scientists, ports authority, and aquaculture and
inshore fishermen
as well. So yeah, a full sort of suite of representatives of use of the sea. On top of that, we had the later consultation sessions on the first plan, but I think for the initial scope, that's where we started.
Thank you. So were stakeholders from different sectors given the opportunity to discuss their priorities for the Marine Spatial Plan together before the plan was drafted?
Yes.
In other words, was there an iterative process where they all came together?
So that was the initial stakeholder workshops, and we had used a few different places. The best one was the main meeting room at St Helier's Town Hall, and we had large round or square tables. We sat people in groups at tables. We asked people, we opened with, don't sit with who you came with. So go and find a different table with different people, so that you're going to be sitting around in a group of 6 to 10 of you, discussing issues, discussing points that matter, and seeing how those fit in the wider context with other people. The only group, I will say, that did not sit in a diverse set of tables were our commercial fishermen, who came to one particular meeting the JFA came as its panel, sat together and made their views known very clearly during that meeting. And I was saddened that we didn't get that mixing of more of the main commercial fishermen into other tables and groups through that commercial fishing and commercial and recreational fishing session. But we did have other fishermen in the room through all sessions who contributed as well.
So once you've gone through your initial process and you came up with a sort of a first phase, second phase concept of what this plan was going to look like, there was no reintegration of these kind of meetings?
So we had several follow-up. We and the consultants, Fiona Fife Consulting, had several follow-up meetings where ideas had been brought out through the... Sam, can you remember how many different things we got through the first scoping workshops?
What comments?
Yeah.
It's about 400
Yeah, so
individual comments. 400
initial comments from 150 odd stakeholders. Some of those were enough. They were clear. You could understand what someone wanted. We took that away and put it in. Some of those led to further questions and further consultations. So we met again with ports. We met again with the electricities and telecoms companies. We met again with fishermen a lot. We met again with other interest groups to further build those conversations and really dive into what it was that people were trying to bring out in those initial comment cards, because they were quite small comment cards.
But were these individual these meetings with the individual groups on their own rather than being a cross-section, bringing them together again to hear the
Yes, although
overall.
cross-section was brought together every quarter through the Marine Resources Panel. So that's where we have our main marine user group. So they would have updates and we get feed-in from that, which helped build the picture.
Did we have meetings, I think, well, I know the answer is a rhetorical question, meetings with specific parts of the commercial fishing industry, so like mobile gear people, for example, met separately from potters or from scallop divers?
Yeah, so there was a mobile gear working group that's ongoing at the moment, or was ongoing during that period, and we worked with them as the identified section of the fleet that would be most affected. You can consult for an awfully long time if you want to, but we had a fairly tight timeline given to us by our Minister at the initiation of the plan that we ran to try and get the best information to develop this first iteration in the plan. And one of the things I love about Jersey and its process for developing these things is the scrutiny process. When you get as far as you can, you build as much as you can, and then everyone gets another say, and you get to see where you are again. And I'm not saying we've got everything right by a long shot, but I think what we did was pretty solid.
Okay, I think I'll jump my next question onto this feedback idea. So what feedback have you received to indicate that the plan and the implications of it have been well understood by the different types of fishers who may be impacted and by other stakeholders? And I think this is our earlier discussion and saying these emails you've received, which is clearly showing a gap in understanding or concerns, etc. So maybe if you could just maybe carry on that conversation a bit further, please.
I would say that the emails I've received show that there is a good understanding of what we're proposing because they're all complaining about it. And the fact that both sides are complaining about it means to me that we seem to have, or we have achieved what we were trying to do, which was to find a compromise down the middle where there was no major extremes on any particular side. Yes, we're protecting more of the environment. We are making it more difficult for the mobile gear fleet, but that will make it in some ways easier for the people who dive for scallops. You know, no take zones will affect anybody who uses that area because they won't be allowed to prosecute that particular small area any longer. But I would say that the responses I've had show that fishermen do understand. And in fact, they want to understand more. One of the complaints is that there's still that the line, if you like, the thickness of your biro on a chart is actually quite a few, you know, it could be a couple 100 metres thick when you actually analyse it in great detail. But until the waypoints are officially agreed in the States Assembly.
Would you, sorry to interrupt you, would you say that the reason that a lot of people are complaining is because you're potentially they perceive you to be actively putting them out of business?
Well, I'm not trying to put anybody out of business, and I'd like to think that the changes that I've made to the original draft, which was in place at the beginning of the year, will show that and demonstrate that what I've done is, and what the department have done is, listen to the consultation responses, the very many that we've heard about, and taken action to try where we can to see if we can make their concerns and their worries a little bit, to reduce them a bit so the impact on them isn't so great, to give them a bit more warning. Yes, there's an area here, we are going to protect it. You've got 5 years, you need to realise that's going to happen. This area here, we're not going to protect immediately, but we are going to do more research. If we find there's lots of valuable environmental stuff that needs protecting there, we will act, but you know, we're not going to do that immediately.
And can I come in on that one for the future? When those changes will be made, if you find the evidence to make that decision, or future ministers to make that decision, would you be going back to engagement and consultation and doing the same kind of processes as now, or will that be, because it's now in the Marine Spatial Plan, it's kind of set there? So once the, you know,
No, well, not if I have anything to do with it, because I always like to consult and make sure I get everybody's views on board before we take any decision. And it may be, if we've got an area here we do more research on, we might find that certain parts of it are more protected or need more protection than others. We can talk to the fishermen, they will have some input as to which bits they might find are less useful to them or easier to fish. And you put everything in the mixing pot and hopefully come out with an answer. It may be that the answer doesn't get us to 30 by 30, but 30 by 30 is not my priority here. So I want to be quite clear, I am not a minister who's come in and said we have got to get to 30 by 30. But I accept that at the moment we're not anywhere, we're 23?
23 point.
23.3.
23 point something in this draft. And I accept that by 2030 we will be a lot closer to 30%, but we may not get there, not initially. But that's not my driving force behind this at all.
Could I just come in on that, Minister, as well? As there were some areas offered to us that we could include inside the MPA network by the fishermen as a compromise, but because we didn't have any data there to say that it was biologically or ecologically important, we didn't want to be including areas in a potential 30 by 30 network that don't have any benefits associated with it. So it's we've put forward the areas that we have that strong basis for, and any extra information we get going forward can help inform any future areas.
And we could add small parts of percentage to the protected area by looking at marine cables and stuff like that. There are ways to get to 30 by 30, but I think if we're going to do it, we need to do it genuinely and say, you know, we are protecting these parts of our waters for genuine reasons.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So what engagement has taken place with relevant French and English marine resource and fisheries authorities to align the marine spatial plan with those in place or in development in those jurisdictions? Yeah.
Well, we've consulted certainly with other Channel Islands, Guernsey particularly. They don't have a plan. They're very interested to see what we're doing because I think they're keen to develop one right on the back of ours. We've spoken to the UK about fishing. We've certainly spoken to the French, and we've spoken to both regional Brittany, Normandy. We've spoken nationally, and we've spoken specifically in places like Granville. But Francis, tell us a bit more.
Interestingly, the first UK-French marine spatial planning meeting was held at the St Helier Yacht Club and hosted by Jersey. So that was back in 2018, I think, and they needed some neutral turf on which to come together to start talking about marine spatial planning on that wider scale. So we've had those contacts and had that connection since then, which is quite useful to us. But we're part of the UK's six-nation marine spatial planning group, which includes the UK as a whole, plus the devolved administrations, Ireland and the Crown dependencies. We also look to work very regularly with our French counterparts and have done for a long time. Through the TCA process, there have been updates on this, as well as the French being a regular consultee as part of the MSP consultation process. We briefed quite recently, in the middle of last month, the Normandy Committee Regional de Pêche on the outcomes of the Marine Spatial Plan as a courtesy, because they had given us one of our largest submissions to the consultation at over 40 pages. And we're looking to offer a briefing to Brittany very soon as well, on the same basis.
Mark, can I just add to that, while we're talking about that, the French national government, certainly the French ambassador was in Jersey quite recently. She spoke to us about the MSP, and I made sure that officers on the day of publication were speaking directly to their French counterparts in Paris to make sure that they were aware. It's no surprise, and it wouldn't be a surprise to hear that we've had a lot of discussions with the French at all levels about this plan. And I might just add, before I go back to Francis, the French have their own ideas about marine spatial planning. They also have their own ideas about protecting areas, and their fishermen are having the same challenges with their regional governments, if you like, that our fishermen are having with us. The same discussions are taking place on both sides of the water.
So, sorry to carry on that one. So what influences would you say those discussions have had on the shape of the plan or on specific aspects of it?
Well, certainly we were at pains to point out to the French, whether that was regional or national, that the consultation process to us was a really important phase. And we wanted to be very clear that we were not in the game of having a consultation, putting the responses on a shelf and just carrying on with what we wanted to do anyway. And I think you can see through the responses specifically that we've made to the various consultation responses and the changes that we've made. I mean, in certain areas, in fact, in one area at the Equios, I think we've got a grandfather area which we've done specifically for almost a single boat. which demonstrate a French boat, which demonstrated to us that the vast majority of his income came from this small, and we said, okay, be aware we're going to make some changes here, but we're going to do it in a few years' time and not, I mean, we're not going to chop you off. There's been other responses from the French, and it would be no surprise. We've had the Granville Bay Treaty, which has run for quite a long time. That involved regional and Jersey meetings on a regular basis, and it's you know, it's been challenging, but it's always challenging.
Absolutely.
Okay, so was the plan translated at any stage? And if yes, into which languages?
Yes, but
There was a summary version of the Marine Spatial Plan that was translated into French to send to
You didn't consider other languages like Polish or Romanian or
We
other
we
areas?
looked at it and we spoke to the comms office about the options for it, both due to time and budget, and the interest showed so far. We agreed to press ahead with English and French as our main languages for working in.
Okay, thank you. So my final question in this section is, Minister, you'll be aware that fishermen have made submissions to the panel and that some are uncertain about their future and feel, and we've already indicated this, unwilling to invest as a result. What reassurance do you feel you can offer them?
well, as I said a little while back, I am not in this job to put fishermen out of business, and what I've tried to do here with the revised version of this draft is to find ways forward where we can keep people, fishing fleet in business commercially, so that as we close more areas off to them, depending what métier they're following, they find that the waters they are still fishing in have got enough product in for them to continue to make their living. But we are sending indications of directions of travel. There will be management put in place to protect the stock, because as I said before, we've seen what happens where we overfish and it takes a long time to recover, and I don't want that happening on my watch. So we will take management measures to protect the stock and at the same time hopefully protect the commercial fleet so that they can continue to make money.
Thank you.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, if there's nothing in the sea to fish, there won't be any fishermen making a living out of it.
Understood.
Thank you, Minister. And just to pass over to our external advisor on this, if she has any further questions under consultation and engagement.
Yeah, thank you. Just trying to understand in the sort of consultation versus participation process. I saw there was a direct travel document that was produced sort of halfway through. Just wondered if stakeholders were involved in sort of helping to develop actions or to feed into actions, or if the first time they saw them was at the consultation phase.
Certain stakeholders who were considered to be knowledgeable and expert in different areas were used to develop specific things. We didn't, for example, draw lines on a map without talking to fishermen, as well as looking at what we had in their data. Data will tell you so much, and it will tell you an awful lot if you use it well and carefully, but sometimes you need to speak to users as well to fully understand it. So yes, there were conversations the whole way through, but there were elements that people hadn't seen until it was published, and that's the nature of the plan, because you take in information in those phases and then have to get on and do some work and then present the next round.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I was just trying to get an understanding of the sort of process.
Also, just add, the direction of travel document was only finalised after the stakeholder workshop, so it wasn't. It was already being informed by the stakeholders at that stage.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about it before, but maybe in the process section I should have mentioned the fact that, as I said, I've had some correspondence from various fishermen in the last few weeks, and what I'm saying to them all is, there was an original document, we amended it, we published the draft, it's now subject to scrutiny. If you have some strong views, please, here's the scrutiny panel, use the scrutiny panel. As Minister, I've published this, I'm not going to publish or propose amendments to it before the debate, because it's in the scrutiny process. So I am urging, and I'm certainly encouraging people to come to use a scrutiny panel and to continue the consultation. But I don't think at this stage it's right that, as Minister, propose any further changes to this until the debate.
Thank you, Minister. Ness, was there anything else on that question?
Yeah, interesting to learn more about the Marine panel and what role played in the process.
Sure. Are you happy for me to?
Yes, carry on, sorry.
So, I mean, I've described who the Marine Resources Panel are, Ness, but they're a regular advisory group to the Minister. It's chaired by our Director, Willie Peggy, and staffed by officers from the department, normally a Senior Fisheries Officer, the Head of Marine Resources, and a scientific representative. But they're an open and honest and often very robust forum for discussion around marine issues that will have people who are no shrinking violets and willing to make their opinion and the needs and views of the organisations they represent known very clearly. So it's always a good sounding board for work we're doing, and we've used it throughout the process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think looking on time, and there are two big areas that we want to focus on, but there's a few things I just wanted to talk about international relations, and I know we've already covered that a little bit with Deputy Waugh's discussion about your dialogue with the French and the English, but and you talked a little bit about the fact that the French and the British came on neutral ground in Jersey to discuss about their marine spatial plan and what was happening there, and really we wanted to understand when developing the model around the marine spatial plan what consideration was given in using the same methodology as the French or the British authorities. Was we using the same methodologies, and if not, why are we not?
It's probably one for us. Well, I don't mind.
I mean, I can talk to a bit of the context first, and then if you want to talk about the detail of the methodology, Sam. Yeah. So there's a lot of difference between a small island with 2,000 square kilometres of sea and a country, the UK, with 6 million square kilometres. And France with 11 million. So scale is one thing that's been important to this, and it's important in both ways in that we can be a lot more fine detail because we're focusing on such a tiny area, whereas the broad brush approach that's needed for marine spatial planning on a grander scale, and in the UK it's not even called marine spatial planning, they're called marine plans, although they do the job of marine spatial planning. And that has been a challenging and politicised process for the UK. The only other thing I want to mention before Sam talks about the style of MSP development is that during the MSP consultation process and development process, we have also been consultees in the redevelopment of the French marine spatial plans for their Normandy and Brittany plans. So we joined French workshops and gave consultation responses to their plans as well as them responding to ours. And the message from both parties the whole way through, and with Guernsey as well, has been you don't plan for marine spaces that border your neighbours in isolation. So it always has to be done in the wider context. And we always respect and look to the plans of our neighbours and look to help our neighbours understand our plans and build and develop those. But Sam, do you want to?
Yeah, so I'd just say that the style of the Marine Spatial Plan did evolve over time, and it also predated my involvement in it. So Paul Chambers and the planning officers did a lot of looking at what other islands or jurisdictions were doing. I know Bermuda and Seychelles, those were two marine spatial plans that were heavily researched in helping us to shape our marine spatial plan. And then that later evolved once we brought Fiona Fife and Associates on board, because they had a very strong planner on board that team. So she was able to advise on how we should be going about ours. And we were very mindful to try and make it more local, community-led. That's why we have those pen portraits throughout the marine spatial plan. So we've gone out to marine stakeholders, people that are using the marine environment every day, to make sure that their thoughts are included in the plan and made very clear in there.
Thank you. And the final question on this is do you feel that the marine spatial plan, marine protected areas, the fishing zones, it's all consistent and compliant with the TCA agreement?
No doubt be robust conversations around that. as that process goes through, the UK is being taken to arbitration by Europe at the moment over some of their recent fishing zone designations, and we're hopeful we can manage dialogue and work together in a collaborative and grown-up way to not go down such strict routes, but we'll see where we end up. There is always a risk that you can get so close, but you can never fully agree.
But the management measures are always subject to outside verification. I mean, recently we took a very small change to the minimum landing size for lobster. You know, that decision had to be uploaded to Brussels to make sure that it was okay there and venture informed.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we move on knowing that we don't have that much time left, and we've got two big areas. And though we have touched on this a lot, I think it's important to have a focus on the marine protected areas, and Deputy Curtis to
Thank you,
lead
Chair.
on this.
Minister, we have spoken, and you've obviously highlighted perhaps some of the reasons that the consultation has changed the sizings and sightings of the marine protected areas. But could you drill down a little further on the rationale that has resulted in changing MPA coverage from 27% to 23%?
Okay, well, there's a number of reasons why the percentage numbers have changed. Certainly I sat down very soon after I became Minister and said, you know, where are we? What are we proposing? Where are the areas of contention? We looked at the consultation process. I mean, from a very straightforward point of view, I went to the team and said, as somebody who spent a little bit of time at sea, from a practical point of view of navigating and stuff like that, I would much prefer to have straight lines rather than original curvy line around. And I felt
From the base points.
yes, from the base. And so these curved lines on the chart was something that we decided to go away from. For both sides, I felt that would make life easier. So that made us some changes, but it was the effect of the original plan on some parts of the fishing industry and the responses that we had, which mainly made us look again. I was very big on, as I've said, on compromise, and I said, right, we need to find ways of reducing this number so the effect on the industry is less initially, but at the same time indicating a direction of travel. So we've got areas now, so we've grandfathered, there's a small up there, one at the Ecrios, there's a larger area down to the south of the Minkies. And we've also, most importantly, designated these areas of further research where the department admitted they might like to know more about what's on the seabed, which species, how much we fish there. So it was agreed that we would take certain areas out of the original plan and we would make them subject to further research. Now, the department are going to do that work. They'll come back with the data and we'll see where we are. But the word on those areas is we're going to look, and if there's something there to protect, we will act. But similarly, we're not going to protect areas that aren't worthy of protection.
Okay.
And that's the reason why the 27 came down to 23. I mean, you could look at what we've proposed now and say, if all the research areas that we do then get protected, once we've been through the grandfathering stage, we're going to be back up to...
So we're currently at 22.3%, and the survey areas, the research areas, if they're included, would be an additional 4.4%. I've got a slide that we could put on the screen if it's useful, but...
maybe if we need to later, but...
Yeah.
But there was a reduction, 27 to 23 or thereabouts. We've indicated we could get back up to that number, but we need to do more work. Certain areas, smaller areas, are going to be grandfathered. There's a bit of seasonal area in there as well, which doesn't qualify.
Could I also say that the original areas, as proposed when it went to consultation, were based on the background reports, the habitat assessments, the various bits of work we did from all the information we were able to get together. What we lacked at that point, although we had asked for it, was more detailed and up-to-date fishing information from the mobile gear fleet, who did not provide it following the first consultation. in a format that was usable. We asked quite extensively for their chart plotter details, for the information from their fishing tracks, so that we could build that in and understand, yes, we've got areas with important biological habitats, but how important are they to fishing as well? We had some volunteer data through a system we called FishMap, which we'd run a few years ago, but it was sent in contextual ways where the period of time it was delivered for made it very hard in some cases to use. Once we'd finished the consultation, we did get further information in. Once we went to the main consultation, we did get much further information in, and that was able to help the Minister make those informed decisions of, yes, these areas are really important to fishing, either on a temporary or permanent basis. So that's where the research zones come in. That's where some of the edges have changed, as well as the straightening of lines, and that's where the seasonal fishing grounds have come in as proposals specifically from the fishing fleet, and sitting down with those groups and working with them.
So there's a couple of questions I've got coming off the back of that, but the first one is about the data that informed the initial areas. And I've had a chance to read the methodology summary that was attached to the website, which is incredibly detailed in sections 2 to 4, as to per square kilometre what the OSPAR threatened at-risk areas are, what the ecological score is, and what's interesting is the areas taken out are at part, especially to the east of Les Enquêtes, are incredibly scoring highly in multiple quadrants, scoring up at 100% of seabed covered by OSPAR threatened species. So with that compromise, you know, how comfortable are you that you've made those right compromises given the data that was used to create those MPA areas was described as the right balance at the first place? And whether the areas chosen to carve up in the lack of very quantifiable fishing data is the right weighting to actually remove these threatened seabeds.
Well, Francis can talk about the area to the east of the Enquêtes, but certainly we're not quite as much as we proposed initially, but we're certainly a lot more than we have now. But all those areas right out to our territorial, I was under the impression that we could do more research there.
Yeah, it's defining. I mean, those 1 kilometre grids, Sam is probably best to give us the exact detail, but those 1 kilometre grids were based on the best information from those areas and some modelling data. The modelling data is about 70% accurate. So to really ground truth that, because those are very important areas to commercial fishing, to dredging as well, and they were the areas that were an immediate red flag to a lot of the fishing fleet too. So we've agreed that we need further evidence on those areas before making a decision on what their future is. But Sam, do you want to talk to that?
Yes, so it's just sort of the further away from shore you get, especially on the east coast, we have lots of visual evidence further in that those habitats are there, so the male beds, and then that evidence is used to inform the model, which has said, yes, there's male here, and we have maps from the 70s that also say that male is there. But to ground truth that now that we know that that area is very economically important, we thought it was prudent to make sure that we go out and redo those surveys and actually have the visual evidence that it's there and in what state it's in before we define that area for protection. So it may define it more around that habitat to then lessen the impact on the mobile gear fleet.
And what's the timeline for that kind of surveying? Because you don't want to obviously expand that and therefore they...
Yes, so we would hope to do it next summer. We have already started some drop cameras, but none of the data has been analysed, and we have more areas that we need to do either tow videos, and then once we identify that the male beds are there, it's getting grab samples to say whether it's live, dead, whether it's a mix, is there, what's the biodiversity like in that male bed.
So
varies.
That data will come in within your term, Minister, and we understand that what's been removed, if current modelling is right, will reduce protected merle beds from 88% down to 33% protected. How quickly do you think you will act on reweighing the compromise you seek to address this year on
Merle is
new data?
pretty important, mainly on the basis that it just doesn't grow very fast, and we don't want any live merle beds destroyed any more than we have already. I think we've protected the areas we need to immediately, but as Sam has said, we've started doing drop cameras on 500 metre spacings. I'm trying to think, I think it's 500 metre spacings. And where we have evidence that needs further research, we will do that. But this is the proposal that's going to the Assembly later this year. We'll see what comes out of that process. But as data becomes available, we will act. I mean, if we had had more data that showed that Merle was really there in great quantities and needed protecting, I suspect that area that we've said we will do further research in would have been reduced, and the immediately protected areas would have increased.
The area that was protected about 10 years ago as well was one of our highest Merle banks, so inside of the enquêtes. That was identified through towed video 10 to 12 years ago as absolutely key in terms of quality Merle of a good value, good structure integrity and live proportion. So,
And is that being protected?
that was protected in 2013 and remains protected and is an OSPAR recognised MPA area. I'd say, and yes, the percentages it does show a reduction in that sense from what is proposed as a definite thing to come in. But as those research areas are research areas, and the decision is not made one way or the other, and they're not blocks. So you may say yes, this section, not that section. You can decide it based on that.
Just touching on that concept of uncertainty and further research, the methodology for MPAs, figure 5.5.1, considered the idea of warranting further research or survey work. But in that instance, the areas highlighted for seabed research were south of the Enquête and east of the Minkies, and south to the south and to the north of, respectively, the Ecrahos and the Enquêtes. So what's changed between recognising uncertainty in the data in those three areas to the areas now included?
So
has the methodology changed as a department?
No, it's more to do with that. Those are the areas that are identified as being economically important, and so then making that closure based on the evidence we currently have is harder to make that argument to close it straight away.
So the burden of proof on these high economic importance areas needs to be, in your view, Minister, higher to close them off. So you need the further survey work to be able to make a decision that would have economic consequences.
Yes, I think that's probably the case. I mean, as I said, I've used the word compromise a number of times, and where the department can clearly show that there's something that really needs protecting, it's being protected. Where we think we might do a bit more research before we protect them, or if we protect them, I've said yes, I think that's a better way. I mean, as we pointed out, I mean, I'd like to think there's something in this revised draft for everybody. We're increasing the size of, proposing to increase the size of marine protected areas significantly from 6-something%
6.7
to 23.
Yeah.
We're less than we were in the original plan, and you pointed out, Deputy, 27 down to 23. So some of the people who feel very threatened as mobile gear operators, there's something in there for them. We're increasing the amount of area they can't operate in, which gives something to the scallop divers, gives also protection to those people who do static gear, and I receive complaints from, people who drop pots, who get the pots dragged away by people dredging through their areas. There's conflict not only between the commercial fishing industry and the environmentalists or the recreation or what have you, there's conflict within the commercial fleet itself, because the different métiers don't work or can be in conflict with each other. So I'm hoping with this revised plan that I'd like to think everybody who looks at it will think, well, that's slightly better for me than it was previously.
Okay. I'm conscious of time, and so I've got one final question on this section, which is about that future step when new data comes in, and you've described this as a living document. Are you able to give this panel the view that when new data comes in, when you are certain that the evidence changes, that you will make evidence-based decisions and be able to assess the harm that activities are causing versus the economic impact?
And the answer is absolutely, and I say that on the basis that just about everything contained in here when it comes to MPAs or fishing commercially or what have you, is evidence-based. Everything has to be evidence-based. If we want to make decisions on management of the commercial fishery, which isn't evidence-based, we will send that off to the French or off to Brussels or what have you, and they'll come back and say, on what basis, Minister, are you doing this? And if I can't provide the scientific evidence, they will say, no, we're very sorry, but we don't agree.
Thank you.
But then, in that case, I mean, maybe that's why the economic impact assessment was only done after the consultation. Was that because of the data that you were not able to
So
get hold of?
we've done a business impact assessment that looks very specifically at mobile gear fishing based on the data that was available. It's not a full economic assessment, impact assessment, as I was told by our economists, not to call it that because that wasn't what it was. But it was much smaller and more targeted. The aim is to do that sustainable economic impact assessment on the whole of the outputs of the MSP once it's set
Understood.
post-consultation.
Thank you.
Sorry, post-debate.
Thank you. I'll pass on to the Consul.
Yes, and the disadvantage of coming as in last is that you've already touched on some of the matters good raised, but if I might concentrate on the smaller mobile gearboats, which you've referred to already. As you're aware, the panel has received submissions from fishermen who believe that the blanket approach taken in designating MPAs has had a detrimental effect on their boats in particular, in the local fleet and the French fleets. Now, my first sub-question is, how have the concerns of this sector of the fishing fleet been addressed, incorporated, satisfactorily
I
dealt
doubt
with?
that those operators of small mobile gear boats will say that I've addressed their concerns. But what I can say is that you look at the proposals now to what they were before, that in the area of St Albans Bay, for example, and of course there's recreational, there's yachting, there's a lot of different people there doing different things. And one of the considerations is St Albans Bay, is it right that we continue to allow dredging in that area where there's so many different things going on? I don't know if you want to add to that, Francis, but certainly I'm aware on the east of the island again, the smaller boats, not so good in the bad weather. You know, you drive them further away from shore. But I, for myself, in my heart, I think we should be saying to ourselves, we cannot continue to dredge close into land on an ongoing basis.
I would add, if Minister, that the decision to include seasonal areas or the proposal to include seasonal areas, which are the green areas around the coast in the plan, was following sitting down with, I think, all, if not all, 90% of the mobile gear fishing fleet, following the consultation, and looking at the charts and going, right, chaps, you can see it in front of you now. You can see what the proposal is. Where is this going to hurt you? Where is it a problem? How can we look at this together, and what can we take back to our consultants, back to our group, and back to the Minister to propose? So we sat with them at Howard Davis Farm and went over these charts on broad scale, looking at where people fished. We offered officers to go down onto individual fishermen's boats to then look at their tracks on their data and download that data and take it back to build into that knowledge set so that we could understand those vital inshore areas that the fishermen, especially of smaller dredgers, and a small dredger is still not a small boat, it's a decent sized bit of kit, you know, the areas that they feel are vital, especially in bad weather or winter conditions. So we have done what I think is reasonable and rationally possible to get that information and to factor it into the plan.
And what is the response of that group of people? Are they resigned to the fact they're going to be heavily curtailed? And
Well, I hope they're not resigned to it, in as much as I've told certainly one or two of them that they need to put their representations into you as a scrutiny panel. If you feel they're valid, you will come forward potentially with amendments to this for the debate. And I think that's the right process to follow. But as I can say, all I can say is to reiterate again that, you know, dredging is not great for the seabed. It's something we're looking to reduce, which if we can. I accept that dredging or people who operate dredgers will be affected by these plans, but certainly at the moment, the scallop stock is in rude health, and there's a lot of scallops there. And our job at the moment is to make sure that we keep it that way.
Thank you. Can we move on to point 34, please, Conor Town? I think.
compensatory measures onto that. The action NB5D, the plan states that compensatory measures and alternatives will be considered for fishers within the mobile fishing sector affected by the MPAs, etc. To what extent, again, has that been discussed? Are they accepting of the idea that compensation might be given or will be given?
Well, certainly, we know that, for example, the move by the states, by government, to an increased minimum wage, and even the living wage, has meant that I fought very hard to get some monies to give to farmers and fishermen, or not to give, get some funds for their support schemes, whether that's farming and we're now including fishing. That's really important, because what it's going to allow us to do for the mobile gear fleet, for example, we will want in exchange for support, financial support, we will want them to look at ways that they can reduce their impact on the environment, reduce the amount of diesel that they burn when they're dredging, look for other methods of dredging or for fishing scallops, which are more environmentally friendly. So on one hand, yes, there are compensation measures in place, absolutely, because we realise we're putting them under pressure, particularly through the wage issues. But I think it's also vital, which is why I said it was always farming and fishing, that the monies which were agreed by the Assembly last autumn will allow us for the first time to target specific areas in the fleet, whether it's safety measures, whether it's engine servicing, whether it's boat maintenance, whether it's in dredging terms, you know, losing larger rings so the boat doesn't have to work so hard to catch scallops.
There's less clearing.
So applying again to the mobile fishers, I mean, if the idea is to dissuade them from future dredging,
well, I just want them to I think the message is that generally when it comes to mobile gear, it's not great for the seabed. It doesn't improve the seabed. So what we're trying to do is to find ways for them to do, or to do less damage, if you want to put it that way, to burn less diesel, to take less out of the sea. So the larger rings would allow them. I mean, I think the French use large rings now, don't they?
Yeah, it just allows more self-sorting, so you're lifting less rock and byproduct up to the surface, and it's a cleaner fishing process, is the idea.
it's on the financial side, though, aside from the living wage, are there any other compensatory measures you have in
Well,
mind?
yes, I mean, we appreciate absolutely that, like most industries, regulation is putting more and more requirements on the commercial fishing fleet, whether that's requiring them to do firefighting courses or to maintain their boats or engines to a certain standard, to do first aid courses so that they're in a better place to administer first aid if they should need to do that. We've asked them for, they're having to fit navigational aids which allow us to track their boats. All these things cost money, and we appreciate that. And what we're doing with this marine support scheme is finding ways to feed money back into the fleet in return for public goods. So if they do a firefighting course, they will get a small amount of compensation for that.
Thank you for that explanation. I think if we just move to point 36, and then we're just conscious of time, do the last question on this point, and then
Number 36.
Number 36, if that's okay.
Yes, okay. How quickly can the proposed MBAs be set up and operating? And what is the timescale in relation to the commitment to 30 by 30, although you already said that wasn't your priority?
Okay, well, just getting back to a response I gave right at the outset, we're fortunate in that we have some legislation in place already, and that will save us a lot of time. But once it's timescales, it won't be immediate. I know that.
As this is not a statutory document, and it's not as you say, an immediate knock-on effect. The aim is to do it having done the sustainable economic impact assessment that will follow state's debate and acceptance of the plan, unless it gets rejected. And we'll then look to work with the fleet to bring in those modifications to the spatial management of fishing over a period of time that makes sense environmentally and economically. I would imagine 12 to 24 months initially, with then grandfathering going ahead, taking into account things like the 30 by 30 commitments, development of the wind farm, other marine access needs. Nothing is set and formed exactly, but the aim is to do something that is on a human timescale and understandable to those that are reliant on areas of seabed.
Thank you, and thank you, Contab. And I know the Contab will come back in a minute on monitoring and enforcement as our last section, looking at the time, next 20 minutes. But I just want to see if our external advisor has any questions or under the MPAs that came up from that discussion.
No, I think we're good on that one. Thank you. It's been very comprehensive. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, Contab, please.
Yeah, quickly moving on then. A large number of the actions in the plan are marked as resources required, and the responsibility appears to lie across many departments, both external and or arm's length bodies. Who will have ultimate responsibility for delivery and implementation of the MSPs? I see, Fizz, I'm pleased to see that Marine Resources have their own shirts, etc. But I'm concerned as to whether that's...
I could be wrong, but I would hazard a guess that the ultimate decision maker will be the minister, in as much as the minister turns up in office with priorities, and if he's determined that certain things happen and certain other things don't, at the cost of other things not happening, that may well be the case. And certainly those are the sort of challenges that I'm facing at the moment, and I'm sure I'll talk to you as a panel on those at another time. But marine resources is one of my priorities, and I certainly do all I can to meet the officers as regularly as possible and move forward with any initiatives that they think are important. But I wouldn't hesitate to say, no, I don't think so, if it's not important. But they do sit separate from others. They do have a budget, and marine resources do what it says on the tin.
Yeah, I think the concern is just whether you or this team of Marine Resources has sufficient funds, given that responsibilities for implementation is dealt with elsewhere, and how do you control that?
We have sufficient funds currently, but there can be no doubt that the amount of work the team have to do with the changes post-Brexit and the TCA. We are now responsible for our own territorial waters. We have a lot more boats in the territorial waters which fall under our jurisdiction, if you like, and by that I'm talking about French boats. We licence everything now. We've done that historically for nothing.
I think, Minister,
the team are having to do a lot more than they did previously.
what the Conatab is trying to get at is a lot of the Marine Spatial Plan is not the Marine Resources team. A lot of the implementation of that plan comes by other organisations, other departments, other arm's length bodies. And we are just trying as a panel to find out who can hold that ultimate responsibility to hold everybody to account, to be able to actually be doing something with this plan, so it actually becomes a reality rather than still a plan.
Well, the Minister for the Environment will have ultimate driving power behind it. This is an infrastructure and environment document, but I accept that there will be at times need for input from various others, and I work very closely with the Economic Development Minister on many of these issues, and it's always been a challenge, whether that's agriculture but more specifically fishing. Marine resources are very much involved in the protection of the environment, where we might go in here, but when it comes to fishing, they have very little involvement in the marketing, in the sale of the product off island, in developing new markets or how it might be exported, or the financial challenges of the commercial fleet. And that's where I rely on a close working relationship with the ED Minister and ED officers. And certainly when it comes to support for the industry, that's Economic Minister's money and not mine. I need to be very clear on that. This is where government needs to be linked up. But it's always been that way with agriculture and fisheries. As a department here which are very much involved with the growing, the agronomy, the spraying, the harvesting, the cows. But when it comes to export, that becomes.
I know, but we're talking really about the plan specifically, and there's many other areas.
Ultimately, I think it's the Minister for the Environment, but it will be working with other ministers.
Certainly, and not just ministers, Minister. In that there are objectives in there that will be owned by organisations like Ports and Jersey Heritage, and those sit obviously outside of government. Now is a good time for those organisations to be saying, that's great, we need to look for funding, or hang on a minute. And while the plan will be reported on by marine resources officers to the Minister and hopefully back to the States in regular issue through that method, you don't want to create a situation where you put onus and responsibility onto organisations, especially arm's length or third-party organisations, and then can't expect them to fulfil that. So that is certainly, post-States debate, a huge piece of work that needs to happen to socialise, engage and understand how different parts of the island will take forward the responsibilities noted to them and based on areas of expertise, skills and resource.
So the final question on that, you use the expression government linked up, I think, but that's my concern. Are the various departments linked up sufficiently for each department to know their responsibilities and commitment to the plan?
Well, as Francis said a little while ago, this is not going to be a statutory document throughout, so it won't have the gravitas that the island plan will have, particularly not at the moment, but hopefully it would be in the future. But certainly we will have to work with, as Francis said, people outside of government. And I mean, for example, the Equihose comes under the jurisdiction of St Martin's Parish, the Minkeys comes under Greville Parish. You know, there's customs officers to take into account. There's Ports of Jersey who now have major responsibility for lots of the stuff in here. But then there's other environmental bodies which we'll need to continue to consult with. And we have done throughout this. We have a no-take zone in Portlet, which the officers in the department monitor, and I was out with them recently doing lobster trials, but I'm aware that the Societe do a lot of the marine research and data collecting in that area, and we'll have to continue to work with them and others.
Can I also just add that a lot of the chapters and the priorities from other departments or organisations were written in collaboration with them. A lot of it, the ideas have come from them, so they want to see this happen. It's just the support to do that is where we need to work.
Yeah, it's a question I perhaps should have asked before, which is simply, can you please outline the functions of the marine resources team and its current level of resourcing? Can you do that in 30 seconds?
Marine resources team cover pretty much everything inside our territorial
Well,
waters.
less economic, as you pointed out,
Yeah.
but the management and enforcement of fishing activities, of habitats, of habitat valuation, we link with other parts of natural environment to look at invasive species, disease monitoring, aquaculture, fishing, and various marine elements.
Protecting breeding sites is important.
And meeting the requirements of our MEAs, so be it Bonn, Bern, Azkaban, Ramsar, the various different conventions and treaties we're signed up to that fall within our remit, alongside colleagues from Land Resource Management and those that are responsible for the wildlife.
You just mentioned Ramsar. I mean, how often do you need to enforce that?
Ramsar has its own set of management plans. There are 4 Ramsar sites around the island, the offshore reefs and the southeast coast. We have a Ramsar advisory group who meet monthly and meet with the department fairly often as well. We are mandated to hold at least one public meeting a year to update on Ramsar work, and we also report into the international Ramsar structure. So it's a big part of Kerry Ann's daily life. Ramsar and Alex Plasters are a marine science and research manager.
And the other thing that Francis didn't really mention, which does take up not a huge amount of time, but time, is liaison with not only London and Brussels, but with our French counterparts, the FROMER and other scientific bodies, where there's continual dialogue going on between marine resources and all these people.
There was a question of how big a team we are. We're a team of 10, currently staffing 9.
You asked my question about the staffing levels. I mean, basically, do you consider you have sufficient resources in terms of both financial and human to do all you're asked to do?
As I said, currently I'm happy that when we're back up to 10, we'll be fine. We have some very capable people in the department. Financially, at the moment, we're okay. But as I said 20 minutes ago, we've got more to do since TECA with the same number of people and the same amount of money. So there's certainly some thoughts that we will have to...
So once this plan comes into being, you'll have more responsibilities.
I wouldn't say we'll have more responsibilities, certainly, but I would say since Brexit and since the instigation of the TECA, we now have responsibility for a larger number of fishing boats that fish in our waters, which we are responsible for managing and licensing. And at the moment, we don't charge for anything for that.
I think I finished there.
Yeah, Thank you, Conatab. And just something that the Conatab picked up on, and you've talked about going and seeing the note-take zone in Port Lips and monitoring that. Kind of have you got enough, you've said you've got enough resources for the policing of that, but when there are incidences and they're reported or you are able to do actions, how many penalties have actually been administered, not just the no-take zone, but also in Ramsar sites and all the different convention areas that under the different conventions? Or how are you able to enforce the different?
Francis will tell you how many, but I mean, I can say from my perspective that I'm always very clear with the team where they uncover something happening that shouldn't be happening. Not only do we rectify it, but we make sure that people know that we've taken action. And only recently, you know, we've had a situation where a fisherman has been stopped at sea, where some of the things weren't quite correct. I won't go into any detail, but he's been told very clearly that they need to be rectified, and I've made the department very aware that when we find things that aren't right, we will take action, because the last thing we can afford to do is to be seen to be not taking action when we know something wrong is happening. Having said that, it is very challenging to discover things that shouldn't be happening at all times of the day and night in all weathers, but the team do their best, and occasionally, every once in a while, we catch people doing things they shouldn't, and we prosecute them, and usually they're quite high profile, which involves bringing fishing boats into St Helier or quite often French cats.
Cautionary letter with parish hall or going to court, depended on the offence and the circumstances. We're not afraid to take people to task when there's an issue.
Technology is helping. The fact that we can now monitor pretty much every fishing boat working in our waters, it is good. And we now can use radar data as evidence in court.
And VMS data,
Yep.
so
we
satellite
don't
monitoring to automate some of that work to help us make that process efficient.
It's not just enforcement. We're introducing have introduced a new way of small boats, especially smaller boats, to register what they catch, where they catch it, and where it's been landed. It's been hugely successful, and a lot of people are very envious of some of the work we've done, which is making life much easier for not only us but for the fleet.
That's good to hear. And just one question before, a few questions just to wrap up. But how do you work in dialogue with other government departments? For example, managing the onshore pollution that has an impact of the marine environment. How do you ensure that there is enough, that you have enough, I suppose, power there or support to be able to help manage that impact that's coming from onshore going to the marine life?
So the water pollution law actually sits, it's managed through regulation and also through the water and air team, who are part of the lands team. We work very closely at all levels, from the senior leadership team, which are within natural environment, the directorate, up to the executive leadership team, at those levels of management, and then on a case-to-case, case-by-case basis and day-to-day issues basis. If a marine resources officer is alerted to or spots an issue, they'll talk to their water pollution colleagues. Likewise, if they need us on something, we'll work together to get that information, to help build cases, to provide witness statements or expert opinions. And it's one team, one department, one gov, maybe even.
So you feel that this way of working now is sufficient for the future, that kind of fits within the Marine Spatial Plan and fits within that wider onshore, offshore management?
Yeah, and I think in terms of that onshore, offshore management, the Marine Spatial Plan is designed to feed in and support the island plan, which is the onshore element. So hopefully, as those two things come together more with the next iteration of the island plan, there may be areas where it's identified in a need to strengthen things, but we'll know if we're under-resourced in areas. When we start to try and deliver things out of the Marine Spatial Plan, we'll find that out as we go, and we'll highlight it, and we'll show where we're failing to do things and where maybe more resources needed.
And thank you, because that's actually answered a few of questions about the island, the next island plan, and how this will be feeding into that. But what consideration has been given to providing independent, ongoing external review of implementation of the marine spatial plan? Can you think about it, when going through, is there a process that you've thought about to have an independent and external reviewer or review to see that this marine spatial plan is being implemented in a timely manner, that it's being able, resources,
Yeah,
it's being able to?
I'm not sure that we have yet. Certainly, we work with a number of UK universities for some of the coring work that we're doing is one example. But as Sam said, we spoke to other universities in the UK about the development of the plan. Have we got thoughts on how we might review this after a certain amount of time? I guess it's early days.
So obviously we've got our plans to review and report on it internally. Whether you would look to have an independent audit of that work, or whether you'd look to have an independent, opinion given on how it's been carried out, we haven't looked at yet, and that hasn't been resourced in budgets anywhere. But as we've said before, it's a draft plan. It's not come through to final stage yet, so we've got to see what it looks like before we decide how we're going to mark it.
There's always a scrutiny panel. I'm a great fan of working with scrutiny panels to make things better. And maybe in a couple of years' time, the panel want to come back and do a review themselves to see how they're getting on, in which case we'd be delighted.
Thank you. And just 1 minute left. I'd be interested, Minister, in hearing your thoughts that we have had a few submissions. We've heard it also in the press about the calls for an independent regulator that could help monitor the activities of pollutants and contaminated runoff into the sea, so particularly from this aspect. But what are your thoughts on having an independent regulator?
Well, we have quite a strong regulation team inside government at the moment. I'd like to think that we hold ourselves to account. The team are very keen to maintain Chinese walls between themselves and various departments that they are seen to regulate, and that's no different to some of the things that happen across the whole of government, really. We have a regulation team that look after it, and I can assure you that they work very hard to hold us to account. However, there will always be people who will criticise, and it may well be that at some point in the future it might be an idea to have a review of internal regulation to see how good we are. But as regards an ongoing permanent independent regulator for the environment, I'm not sure. It's clear over the decades that it's easy in hindsight to go back and think we might have done that differently.
Thank you. And just finally, to Nest, or external advisor, if there's anything in this section, we've been quite thorough, but if there's anything that stands out for you.
So I'm struggling to get my camera on. Yeah, I guess just trying to put down the relationship and iteration of the plan as it goes forward between the island plan and then the marine spatial plan, and how that might transition in the future, given one of the key drivers was for the MPA network this time. How might that evolve? Can you see it evolving independently? Will the next island plan then influence the marine spatial plan, or could the marine spatial plan potentially be statutory through its own legislation and processes?
Well, my gut feeling would be that it may be quite a while before the marine spatial plan ends up with the same statutory powers, but certainly I would hope that the island plan would inform the MSP and vice versa, because the whole idea is to have the two plans working side by side, and it may be where we're discussing something about the shoreline potentially, or a particular new commercial industry that comes out of, whether we talked about seaweed harvesting, there may be other things, mineral extraction or what have you. It's going to be vital that the two plans work together.
And the timeline we were given to deliver the MSP by the end of 2025 was so that it could inform the next island plan as set out in the Bridging Island Plan. And that certainly, unless the MSP were to become a statutory document on its own, the objective would be to always have a good, solid, up-to-date MSP ready 18 months to 2 years ahead of an island plan cycle, so that it was ready to inform and support the delivery of that whole island plan.
Right. Thank you very much. And I see the time has run out for us, but we have reached the end of our questions. So I'd like to thank the Minister, to officers for attending today and for all your inputs and answers to the panel's questions. And thank you as well for our officers who are here today to support us, and also to the members of public who have been here in the room but also online listening. So thank you very much.